At the core of the trade war negotiation is Made in China 2025. It's a program that Xi Jinping put in place to structurally convert China from being the world factory to the world leader in high-tech industries. Didn't the US gain its world dominance after the UK yielded its position as the center of the world stage? What is the fear this time around? Let's hear my discussion with Assistant Professor of Clinical Entrepreneurship from University of Southern California and co-author of Death by China, Dr. Greg Autry. Some say Made in China 2025 doesn't only seem to be a plan to grow the Chinese economy or making structural changes, it is expansionary in nature. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. It's very expansionary in nature. It's an intent to create a, I think, British imperialist sort of system where the rest of the world is a resource colony for the Chinese manufacturing base, and that the wealth of the Chinese people and the geopolitical power of the Chinese government accelerates. Other countries will produce things like soybeans and send them to China, but not be allowed to produce things like manufactured goods or high-tech materials, which will be the sole province of the Chinese government. And that, I think, should worry us all.
Right. Since joining the WTO in 2001, what has China's trade strategy been?
I think their fundamental strategy has been to target one strategic industry after another, and they've been very clear. Often these are explicitly called out in their 5-year plans. And they go after that industry by subsidizing the manufacturing, very often with state-owned enterprises funded by state-owned banks. Then they lure in a great deal of Western capital to help them execute on that plan with promises of high returns. And they use that to produce massive overcapacity in that particular field, whether that's steel or solar modules. This drives the price of the global commodity down to the point that American and European, Japanese companies can no longer afford to reinvest in their manufacturing facilities and keep themselves current, and they lose their competitive advantage. And this has worked brilliantly for the Chinese. So they end up capturing a monopoly stand in that category, and then they can begin to raise prices in order to bring the profits back to China while their competitors are out of the market.
And why is this unfair?
Well, I don't know it makes a difference whether it's unfair or not. It's certainly not in the interest of the Western countries to lose these industries. I believe it's not in the interest of the global human race for the Chinese Communist Party to hold that much economic power, because that supports their political and military power, which is certainly a problem for China's neighbors immediately, and I believe for the rest of the world going forward. So I don't really worry about issues of fairness as much as I worry about what are the actual long-term outcomes of this. Plus, again, China's companies, particularly state-owned enterprises, focus on driving the manufacturing costs down and the volumes up, and they don't focus on fundamental innovation and development. And this is the sort of thing that will undermine the long-term benefits to everybody on Earth that come from the amazing innovation that happens in places like California, Silicon Valley.
Right. This idea of free market, free trade, and fair competition is a manifestation of human freedom and dignity. However, the Chinese communist regime does not hold the same values. So if these are the driving forces behind the US-China trade conflict and many other conflicts, can policy amendments or changes on the policy level alone really solve all these problems?
I don't know whether they can solve these problems, but we have no choice but to take policy changes and try to aggressively protect the investments that we've made in technologies and industries that produce jobs and wealth for Americans, and ensure that those technologies are not simply transported, and even worse, capitalized with American capital investment to become competing institutions in a country whose ideology is opposed to the things that made all that possible. It's ironic that the Communist Party has learned to use this tool of bourgeois capitalism If you read the Communist Manifesto, Marx is very clear at the beginning about the power of the entrepreneurial class to create wealth and capital for a nation to go forward. And I think that the Chinese are very clear about the importance of leveraging that as a tool in the first step of their agenda. But in the long run, I don't think they're committed to these ideals, and they simply are using them to get to the power base that they need to execute on what they want to do after that, which in my mind is pretty horrific.